Let me ask you a question on that, because one of the questions that I had was, when you have a privately or a private agreement, is this the law that upholds that private agreement?
Yeah, and private agreement is a contract. It's an agreement. And yes, the Constitution protects it as long as it's drafted properly. See, that's the caveat. You just can't write any type of contract.
There you go.
It has to be drafted in a certain way and with certain language so that it doesn't trigger. We call it trigger words. There are statutory trigger terms that involves the public, that as soon as the judge sees this word, public is going to assume jurisdiction automatically.
So you just can't come up with your own rules under private structuring.
You can come up with your own rules as long as they don't violate the public's rules.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Makes perfect sense.
You can do whatever you want to do as long as, people will say that in this space. I have the right to do whatever I want to do as long as I don't injure anybody. Well, that's not exactly the quote. The quote is, you can do whatever you want to do as long as you don't violate somebody else's rights.
Okay.
And the public has rights. It's called the public rights doctrine, okay? You can get an American jurisprudence and go to the chapter under administrative law, and it will point this out to you in the very first paragraph, start explaining to you the rights of the public and the rights of I think it's section 2 in American jurisprudence under administrative law, under public and private. Get into that portion and allow the government to explain it to you, okay? Let me carry on. Okay, so we got the power we can carry on our private business in our own way. Our power to contract is unlimited. He owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to investigation, so far as it may tend to incriminate him. Let me pause right here and make sure y'all understand this, because this is a very, very important chapter. Let me read it again. All right. He owes no duty to the state. You don't have a duty to the state. You don't have a duty to be in the public. You don't even have a duty to pay taxes. You'll find this out. However, if you're not going to pay taxes, that means you can't incur a tax. That's what that means. Voluntary means voluntary reporting. How you report, not if you report. How you report the amount of money you made, all that's voluntary. They don't ask you that. You put it on there how much money you made. You put your deductions on there. You do all that. That's what's voluntary. Okay, they're not talking about you can voluntarily not pay. That's not what that means when they say taxes are voluntary, which means you can voluntarily stay out of the public and not incur a tax. Okay, so he say owes no duty. Duty is the operative term here. Duty. What is a duty? What is the duty that the United States has to you? They're going to explain this right here in this paragraph. They're going to tell you what the government's duty is to you. Mm-hmm. And you need to understand that, because the government has a duty, but then there are benefits and privileges. Benefits and privileges are not a duty. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's not a right. So the first thing you have to discern in private ordering is what constitutes a benefit and a privilege and what constitutes a right. A lot of people out there think they know what rights are, but they don't know. But let's continue. He owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to investigation. You don't have to self-incriminate yourself. That's what the Fifth Amendment is. Right? The Fifth doesn't mean you don't have a right not to talk at all, because you do have a duty to report a crime. However, you don't have a duty to incriminate yourself. And this is what the Miranda is. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. That's what they're telling you right there. Okay, you have a right to remain silent as far as it tends to incriminate you. All right, but you got a duty to report a crime if you see it. So it goes on. He owes no such duty to the state, since he receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life, liberty, and property. There it goes. The government telling you what their duty to you is. The only duty the government has to the American people is to protect their property, protect their liberty, and protect their borders. That's why it was so bad when in Congress, when he asked all the senators to stand up talking about the border, will they pledge to protect the border, and they didn't stand up. What was so egregious about that, because they took an office, and that's a duty. That's not an option. That's a duty. Okay, and the American people need to understand that. You need to understand what are the duties of your government. They have a duty to protect the border. That's a duty. Every country in the world has it. I've traveled a lot of places, and I haven't seen one place that will allow people, illegal aliens, just to come across their borders. I'm sure you traveled a lot too, and you know the same. But it goes on, he says, Let me read that to you again. This is Hale versus Hinkle. He owes no duty to the state since he receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life, liberty, and property. Well, what is it where it says receives nothing therefrom? It's talking about the private individual. When you're operating privately, you're not receiving anything from the government beyond the protection of your life, liberty, and property. When you start delving into outside of duties and getting into benefits and privileges, you lose this protection. That's what the Ashwander rules are all about. Ashwander rule number 6. Let's keep going. His rights are such as the law of the land, long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken away from him by due process of law, another private protection, and in accordance with the Constitution. Among his rights are the refusal to incriminate himself, as I just articulated to you earlier, okay, and the immunity of himself and his property from arrest or seizure except under warrant of law. He owes nothing to the public. And here it is. Here it is. And when you get out there, you're going to see dudes quote this, and they always want to leave this part out because they don't understand it. Let me read it to you again. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. Why does everybody miss that part?
So
you
they
don't owe
leave that
anything to the public as long as you don't trespass. So there are rules. We can contract any way we want to as long as we don't do what?
Trespass their rights.
Trespass upon their rights.